So just a few moments ago, before I started recording this vlog, it was officially announced that Autimatic would be joining Cloud9 in place of Slimmy. Now, of course, there had been a bunch of rumors circulating about this for quite some time, and even a couple of official reports from ESPN and such had been indicating that Autimatic was going to be going to Cloud9. And also, if we're really honest about it, a lot of people slipped up. Nothing, I think, showed a steamed conversation on stream just the day before the official announcement where he was communicating with Autimatic. Some different players that were streaming, rank S pugs, were mentioning, yeah, it's pretty obvious Autimatic's going to Cloud9. So this is one of the worst kept secrets, probably. Cloud9 has a history of this, to be honest. Freakazoid, of course, leaked that he was going to join Cloud9 before he joined them way back in the day. So they've definitely kind of struggled to keep secrets a secret, but yeah, it's finally out there. And so what I wanted to do with this video was talk just about the move itself of Autimatic going to Cloud9, but I also want to use this move as also a way to talk a little bit about some of the issues that Cloud9 have faced recently and some of the things that I think that they could work on to really bring their team up to the next level. Like, I don't think it's as simple as just subtracting Autimatic and subtracting Slimmy and bringing in Autimatic. I think some other things need to happen for this team to kind of hit a higher level. And now that we know the coaching changes, this makes things even more difficult, I think, for Cloud9 going forward. As it was also indicated in this release that Autimatic would join Cloud9, that Slimmy had no intentions of being a coach and would seek being a player elsewhere. So they won't have a coach. And now that the role of coaching in CSGO is looking like it'll be much different now with the ruling that Valve just handed out on the same day as this announcement, that's something else to think about. But I've already done a whole separate video about my thoughts on that coaching thing, so do check that out if you'd like to. So first off, let's just talk a little bit about Autimatic. So he was kind of a young kid, a very young gun in Counter-Strike Source way back in the day. Very young. I think he was only maybe 13 or 14 years old at that point, and that's where I first had heard of him. You know, he just kind of came out of nowhere. Very young guy playing on a couple of smaller pro Counter-Strike Source teams. But in CSGO, most of you will probably know him due to the time that he spent with teams such as Nihilum or Nihilum and Tempo Storm, which is just way back in like the middle of 2015. And then of course he kind of ended the 2015 with Complexity, and of course most recently before this team he was with TSM. And basically, he caught attention when he was playing with Nihilum because they had this big run at the ESEA Season 18 finals in the middle of 2015, where they had that big upset win over Cloud9, and they even had some close maps on Inferno against both Fnatic and Virtus Pro during their tournament there as well. And individually, Autimatic did perform quite well at that event. And then a little bit later on, he played in the CEVO Season 7 finals with Tempo Storm, and they had made some noise at this tournament because they had eliminated the former Winter Fox slash Luminosity slash Mystic team. I think players like Lex and Anger were still part of the team at that time. I think they were playing with Peter, and I think they still had Pit and Devilwalk at the time. They had eliminated that team from the tournament, but the big thing was that they had actually taken a map off of Na'Vi, and they actually played a really close series against Na'Vi at that tournament, and no one really expected this because this was a team that many people didn't expect much from. And of course these players come with their separate ways. Roka now and Echo Fox, Autimatic of course moved on from this team to go to Complexity, and then you do see some of these players still together. I know like Stanislaw was on that team. Obviously he's with Optic. There were a couple other players. I think Rix is also now on Echo Fox. So this is kind of a cool little thing that he did with that team back in the middle of 2015 as well. And then he moved on to Complexity more towards the end of that year, and he played with them for quite a while through the end of 2015, and they never really did much on LAN though. They actually had some decent online play at times, and he individually performed pretty well in all their online league play, but they didn't really do much at LAN. In fact, they had a couple of really disappointing finishes, such as the RGN Pro Series at the end of the year, where they actually lost to this Method team and got eliminated by them, which was Silent and Justin, who used to play for Energy, of course, and then Arya and Davey, who are now on Splice, and then Streber or Roberts, who I'm not sure what he does now. And they also tied to this Nexus Storm team, which a lot of those guys on that team were some of the people that you saw on Team Caliber and such. So just a really disappointing finish there. But then on TSM through this year, 2016, he's actually looked really good. Unfortunately, TSM, wasn't involved in the ESL Pro League, nor were they able to use their full lineup at E-League, so they didn't really get a lot of league play in, but we did see them have a really great performance at the ECS Season 1 Finals, where they actually played really well against Fnatic, though they did wind up losing, but they also did wind up advancing in that tournament. They did beat Cloud9, and they did, in fact, get a top 4 finish. I think they ultimately lost to SK Gaming, if I'm not mistaken. Might be mistaken there, but I think that's it. And also, even at E-League, even though they weren't using their full lineup, it's important to know that Autimatic particularly looked good in the games that they played at E-League. He looked great in that decider game against Fnatic, the group play decider, and also looked pretty good against Dignitas in phase within the group play itself. And individually at ECS also looked good. And so TSM were turning some heads, and while Sick and Twist were kind of the star players doing that, I would say Autimatic was, almost firmly kind of the third guy in line, so to speak. He played a lurk role a lot of the time on the periphery, and I thought he played pretty solid. I think he came out positive in the ECS and in E-League when it came to like KD ratio and stuff like that. And so while he didn't look like a superstar or anything like that, he did look quite serviceable in his role, and I thought he played pretty solid. And so I think his move to Cloud9 will certainly add some firepower, and I think it could also possibly help change up some roles on the team that I think will make the team better overall if Cloud9 sets things up right, which I obviously don't know how they'll set roles up on the team. I can only speculate as to what they might do, or maybe say some things I think might work, but ultimately I am not sure. But now that I've talked about Autimatic's history a little bit, talked about what he brings to the table, how he's performed recently, and how he might be able to add some firepower to Cloud9, I think it's important to talk about the rest of the Cloud9 team and some other things that they might be facing or need to look at to make sure that they hit a good level. And of course, recently they've looked pretty good in online play, and they've looked good online against North American teams for quite a while. Their map win rate on almost every map in the pool has been quite high when it comes to online competition. They just won the iBuyPower Summer Invitational in 2016, where they beat TSM in the finals, and they just look pretty good there. Then at the ECS, Season 1 Finals, they did actually beat Astralis in pretty dominant fashion, though they ultimately lost to TSM so they didn't get top 4, they got 5th, 6th place. So that wasn't too terrible, though I guess, beating TSM was, people were expecting that after they had been able to beat Astralis in a good best of 3. And so slightly disappointing, but not too harsh. But what really hurt them, I think, was the fact that they weren't able to qualify for ESL1 Cologne. This was obviously the kind of the big mishap. They didn't lose to really bad teams. When they lost to G2, who of course most people considered a top team at the time and probably still do. They lost to Mouse Sports, which was a team that they should have been capable of beating, but obviously Mouse had that big run in E-League not so long afterwards, so they were starting to pick things up. And they also lost to Envy, which is a team that was, really struggling lately, of course. They had wins over Tyloo and Empire, which I don't really know much about Empire, and then Tyloo, of course, the Chinese team that had done quite well at Malmö, had really turned some heads there. So that's a decent quality win against Tyloo, but the point is just not being able to get into the major. That's disappointing itself, regardless of the actual results that you go into to figure out why that didn't happen for them. And in E-League, they actually played pretty great in the regular season. They handled, Liquid, who was really struggling at the time. They handled the Renegades before they did the minus Sponge plus Ricky, or Ricky, however you say that, transfer. And they actually competed really well against what is now SK Gaming in the finals of that group. They took a map off of them. They had a really competitive series. Ultimately lost. Were supposed to be in the LCQ, but then wound up not having to because of the whole the current SK, of course, having to forfeit out the season or getting booted out because of roster rules and such. And so they went straight to the playoffs, and they played a really good series against Na'Vi there, but ultimately lost. So I would say their play hasn't been too shabby lately. It's just that they're not quite hitting what they want, like they're not getting the big series win. They didn't make it to the majors, so there's been a couple of things that have really been kind of hard on them, I think. And so to talk a little bit about this team and kind of where they're at right now outside of just results, we're looking actually at some of the other aspects of it, is I feel like they have had some development on the terrorist side, and they have been improving their map pool, but they're still not quite there yet, in my opinion. I think when Urakanji came on as a coach, when Slimmy came in as an in-game leader, you could definitely see that they really did improve the structure of the team, and they caused the team to be a bit more disciplined. They still have this really aggressive play style, but they seem to be more on the same page. They seem to be more coordinated, and so there was improvement there on just how organized they were as a unit while they were implementing this aggressive style. Whereas before, it seemed like when Freakazoid was still on the team, and when they had first brought on Stewie, it seemed like Stewie really was just still really too loose and be like the stereotypical Stewie too much. Freakazoid would kind of do his own thing. They weren't really on the same page, and it just seemed like they would try to make a big play somewhere, but maybe the guy on the other side of the map wasn't, in tune with everyone else, and so you'd have like individual plays go wrong, and then it would just kind of crumble, unless like somebody just hit some really sick shots or something like that. Where it seemed like they just became more developed, like I said, is just better coordinated whenever they brought on Slimmy and Irakanji. Now, I'm not sure which one was the cause of it. I'm not sure if Irakanji's coaching was the big reason. It seemed like they were already starting to get a little bit better before Slimmy came on board with Irakanji's coaching and nothing calling. And they brought in Slimmy. It seemed to get even a little bit better. So it's probably a combination of the two. But the point is, I still felt like they weren't quite there yet. Just simply because even though I did see some really cool tactics from them that time, such as on Cash, they had this really cool play when Slimmy came on board where they would get control of checkers and then push out the vents and get into mid and do like this A split, which was pretty cool. Of course, they had the ability to run your defaults, and they were particularly good on maps like Cash, Cobble, and Dust 2, particularly online and NA, but even looked pretty decent in international results of those maps. But then there was also some maps where they seemed to really struggle, particularly a map like Mirage. I felt like a lot of the times they were a little bit lost. It just seemed like they weren't really as effective on that map on the Terra side as they were on others. They didn't seem to have it as together on that map as when you compare it to some of the other maps I mentioned. They actually seem, like I said, to have developed a pretty solid playbook and seem to have a pretty good sense of themselves and what they wanted to accomplish. However, their train was really rough on land. I think they only went 1-5 on train and land play, but they were really dominant. They actually are undefeated in 2016 so far online on train and actually overpass as well. But the land play just didn't seem quite there. And like I said, their Mirage seemed a little bit shaky. So I think that there's definitely some map pool stuff. Mirage has always been kind of a thorn in Cloud9's side. But right now I just feel like online they can do pretty well against anyone. But on land, it seems like the only maps that they seemed like they had kind of together was Cash, Cobble, and perhaps Dust 2. So we'll just have to see if they can work on that a little bit. And now we'll talk a little bit about some of the players, as that was just kind of a general thought about just kind of, refining their Terra side even more, which is now going to be quite difficult because now we don't know who's really going to lead this team. As Slimmy is gone and they don't have a coach because Slimmy's not going to coach. And even if they had a coach, they can't be as hands-on right now as they used to be, actually being a shot caller from the coach position as what Peacemaker had been doing or what Starx had been doing. That seems like that might not work out anymore unless some type of player union or something is able to battle against the ruling that Valve made. So that's going to be a huge question mark with this team going forward. Forget almost anything else here. Who's going to lead this team? Is nothing going to go back to calling? Is someone else going to try it? I don't know. No one else really has in-game leadership experience on that team. Shroud and Skadoodle seem like too quiet to really do that type of thing. So it seems like it would have to be nothing again, unless Stewie does it, which I heard he was doing a little bit of calling for them, particularly on Mirage or something. But in general, obviously he's not known for that. So I really have no idea what they're going to do in that regard. And that's going to be a huge question mark, a huge thing that needs to be answered going forward. Now just taking a look at some of the players, though, when you look at Shroud, for example, this is a guy that's received some criticism lately because he has had some times where he didn't play so hot. I thought he looked particularly rough at the Cologne qualifiers, as well as he seemed kind of hit or miss at ECS. He'd have a good map here, but a bad map there. And he also did struggle at the EAPL Season 3 finals back in May as well. However, it is certainly true that in his most recent play, when they played against Navi in the E-League playoffs, he looked absolutely insane in that series. He just turned up big time, really looked like the classic Shroud, the Shroud that people like to see on the front page of Reddit, really looked good. And so part of this is just consistency in his performance levels, if you can get that to a good level. Because I feel like a lot of Shroud's career has been, he'll go to an event, he'll have, maybe 70% of the maps he plays, he has like really good maps, but then like 20% he's like average or slightly below average, and then another 10% he's like way off or something like that. Maybe change that a little bit. Maybe it's more like 65 and 25 and whatever. But you get my point. It just seemed like, if he plays 10 maps in a tournament, he's only really going to show up for, 6 of them or something, 6 or 7 of them, and then the others he's going to be, off or just okay. And so that's something that needs to be addressed a little bit. But I also personally think that the biggest thing is getting Shroud more involved on T sides. Now, this was a characteristic of Shroud back in the summer of 2015 when Cloud9 had all those second place finishes, because Sean Gares made it a priority to get Shroud more involved. He talked about this in a couple different interviews, where when he first got Shroud on the team, he was just kind of using him how Shroud had been used on Manajumas and other teams, as just kind of more of a passer rifle, just a hold angle type guy, jiggle PQ, just look for a kill but never really press the issue, hold some sights down as a side anchor. He's particularly well known for playing Pit on Inferno. What was one thing that he was quite sharp at. And, he just saw, that was how he was being used on other teams, but then he kind of really paid attention to how Shroud played, his aim, his mechanics, and was like, I need to get this guy opened up more. And so he did really move him into kind of a second entry fragger position, because nothing became kind of a lurker. Sean was the other, perimeter map player, and then it was like, Freak coming in first and Shroud following him up. And that combination, the way they established the roles on Cloud9 then, these well-defined roles that they had in Sean Gare's leadership, they were able to look incredible on a lot of their terrorist sides with this move. But then for whatever reason, when Sean Gares left the team, nothing kind of retained a lurking role, and then they brought in Stewie, who was alongside Freakazoid, so it was Stewie Freak kind of the 1-2 combo, which makes sense. And so that means Shroud got pushed to a peripheral role again, where he wasn't as effective as he had been as a second entry when Cloud9 had their big run. But then when Freakazoid departed the team and they brought in Slimmy, still it wound up being that Shroud was playing, perimeter roles while, nothing was lurking, and so kind of the map control pack wound up being Slimmy, Stewie, and Skadoodle. Which to some degree this makes sense, the in-game leader with the map control pack to be able to support them, throw nades for them, what have you. Very similar to what Pronax does or did with Godsend as well as Fnatic in many different maps, like Mirage particularly is the famous one for me. But yeah, it just still seemed weird, because it seemed like maybe you take the Sean Gares approach and put Slimmy on an edge roll and then let Shroud become more involved with Stewie to open things up, especially if you want to have that explosive playstyle. That seems like a really good 1-2 punch that you could have. But they didn't do that for whatever reason. So now you have Autimatic coming into the team, who is known as a lurker, and then you have Nothing, who has been a lurker for Cloud9. So maybe you work out a system finally now where you do have Nothing and Autimatic playing peripheral roles, and then you finally get that 1-2 punch back with Stewie and Shroud, and then have Skadoodle, of course, a part of that as well. I think that would be great to get him more involved. I really don't want to see this guy playing, alone on the B side of the map Cobble when you're doing a 1-4A setup, which I would see sometimes. I really don't. I mean, it's okay if he's playing B platform on a default where it's like a map spread, but to have him just sitting B alone, just chilling in drop down room while the other 4 players taking A control just seems silly to me with the type of aim that Shroud had. It seems silly to me that he would always be inside the door on cash and never involved necessarily on getting mid control or something like that. It would be rough to see him play peripherals on Dust 2 instead of getting involved on getting control of middle or getting up the catwalk into the A-bomb site. He was playing up or B on Mirage, like solo roles a lot of the time. Like, what is this? Like, this, it just seems like he needs to get away from this. Playing stairs on overpass, just holding that. I know has that passive mentality sometimes, but he has the mechanics to be quite a good second entry. So I hope that they'll move in that direction. So just leave that there. I know I talked a lot about Shroud. So then finally, let's talk about Skadoodle and Stewie and some of the other pieces here. So with Skadoodle, I think he's been in much better form lately. When I looked at him at the last iBuyPower Online Cup, look at ECS, look at EPL, look at E-League, he's looked like he's getting back to his old self, back when he was considered one of the best oppers in the world. He's still not one of the best oppers in the world right now, but I think he's moving in that direction again, and I think he's really starting to establish himself as one of the top oppers in the scene once more. I also think his development has actually been quite good. I know he's been faulted a lot for being too readable, because he just play the same spots and he wouldn't move around too much and he wouldn't be willing to take initiative on T sides. But I have recently seen him change it up. I would see him play so many different spots on the CT side now. He really does move that op around on the CT side more often than he used to. I have at times seen him get a little bit more aggressive on the T side with the op as well. So it seems like he was developing the right way into becoming a more diverse opper. Now, whether he'll continue that trend or not, I guess maybe that depends on the leadership structure above him. So we'll just have to see if that can continue, but I thought he was looking pretty good lately. Of course, Stewie has developed into quite a star for the team, proved himself a lot. very versatile, being able to implement double op setup sometimes. So Shroud actually sometimes uses a double op on CT side depending on the map. But when Stewie does have the second op, you can definitely have an impact with it. Obviously a great entry fragger. I really think that he has done great. And I think that nothing since he gave up the in-game leadership for Slimmy, he started getting a little bit more production as well. He was starting to look a little bit more like what he was looking like in the summer of 2015. But now, all of a sudden, that comes back into question because now they don't have Slimmy anymore and they don't have a coach. What happens with the leadership of the team? So I will leave it at that. Just wanted to use this video to talk a little bit about Autimatic and his addition to Cloud9, and then a little bit about some of the other things going on with Cloud9 that need to be looked at or addressed, in my opinion. So yeah, I hope you liked the video. If you do, please follow and subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.